Hi, morning everyone. So we've got three things for you today. It is local election days. It's also Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you and all that. Rishi Sunak's a bit of a fan of Star Wars. So he's, and I'm sure he's well acquainted with the concept of karma, being a Hindu. So he can have a really good day today celebrating Star Wars Day and a really terrible day tomorrow with the results coming. But there's three things on today. I thought I would discuss the Tory culture wars referencing that racist pub in Essex that the Home Secretary decided to support, which has now had to close down. More dirty tricks, more dirty Tory election tricks. And also Boris Johnson seems to have recorded himself breaking the law again. So that'll be interesting. But first of all, so for those who don't know, there was a pub in Essex and it received a complaint. It was displaying racist dolls. And it received a complaint. The police went along and seized them and said, no, this is not right. And the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was going, oh, the police shouldn't have done that. But which, of course, made the story much bigger. And, you know, Leanderthal waded in and all the Tory culture warriors. And then it turned out that one of the owners, it's like a husband and wife, I think. So one of the owners had been posting Facebook posts glorifying the lynchings of Mississippi in the really dark days of America. And so it all snowballed from there. And then the next thing we knew is like the Good Pub Guide and various other like industry groups were removing this pub, the White Hart Lane in Essex, from their listings because they think we don't want to be associated with this. And now it has turned out that Carlsberg and Heineken have also said, stop using our beer. And it turns out that a pub without lager doesn't do very well. And the company who service their pumps has also said they won't work for them. So basically, there's no viable business model anymore. So the pub has had to close down. It will reopen under new management at some point, of course. But for now, it's had to close down. And the individuals, the little bigots, apparently are going to go and live abroad. So, which is, I thought, is quite interesting. So these racist bigots are now going to become immigrants. But there we are. But I think it is worth pointing out, this is just the latest case in consumer power working against hate. You know, and I remember when GB News, for example, first started, and obviously lots of people were advertising on them, and then various anti-hate groups and campaigners lobbied the companies that were advertising on them, and a lot of them pulled their adverts. They argued that they didn't really know what GB News would be, which in a way was fair enough because it said it was going to be one thing, and then we all knew it was going to be another. And now they complain about the fact they struggle to get advertisers. So they're really struggling for advertising revenue. There are still people who advertise on them, such as Warburton's. It's a shame. I quite like Warburton's, but I don't have Warburton's anymore. Hovis is good enough anyway. It just seems to me that, and you think about it, so why do companies behave this way? And it's because their marketing departments, they're not all woke warriors. It would be because they understand that being on the side of woke is better for business than being on the side of the petty bigot, you know, which indicates that really, if you think about it, despite the amplification of Tory culture wars in the press, most people are not on the side of hate. If they were, if it was even balanced, you wouldn't see companies cutting all association with any partners that turn out to be bigoted in some way, you know, which I think is a very positive thing. Lucy's saying there's a house on my bus route that has a guy in every window. I'm like, it's okay to own one, but why would you display them? Again, that in itself is hateful. You know, even if you had them for whatever reason, putting them in your window, it is like you're sort of deliberately trying to upset people, isn't it? Because there's no reason to do that. But there we go. I thought that was a good piece of news. But on to the local elections, because it is local election day today. And don't forget, if you are going to take your photo ID. And here's a thing. Make sure you take the right photo ID, because I'm just going to remind people of a little bit of naughtiness that occurred last week or the week before. So there was a these were Tories in Norwich, and they'd sent leaflets out in their local area, reportedly to a lot of Labour areas, saying you don't need any ID to vote. Just turn up, you don't need any ID. Now, this, of course, is dead wrong. And when it was pointed out that, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. Sorry, made a mistake. We're very, very sorry. And I thought to myself, well, if they can prove that this message has been used in past years, maybe. I just thought it was very doubtful. But here's the latest one. So where is it? There it is. This is a Tory party leaflet. I may have to read it to you because I've cut off the bottom accidentally there. I can't. Where is this for? I'm not sure. Knighton. Anyway, wherever it is, whatever it says is. Let me read it out to you. It says at the bottom, you can use any form of photo ID to vote for your local Conservatives. Current and expired, you can still use your photo ID if it's out of date, so long as you can be identified from the photo. Now, here's the thing. You can use any form of photo ID. No, you can't. And this is clearly not, they can't use the excuse, oh, sorry, it's an old one, because that has never, ever been the case. These are the first elections in British history where you've had to have ID, photo ID, and you are not allowed to use any photo ID. So again, what are they doing here? They're trying to get maybe students to turn up with their NUS card, which will not be accepted. Or their own bus pass, which won't be. Elderly bus pass, no problem. Young person's bus pass. I had a bus pass when I was younger to prove I was young enough to pay the lower fare. No, not allowed. So, and this one is deliberate. This is the sort of thing that should absolutely 100% be investigated by the Electoral Commission. But I will remind people, the Electoral Commission is now, it's no longer independent. Otherwise, I'm quite sure they would have launched an investigation. I think they would have already announced it. And the rule now is that to launch an investigation, they need permission from the relevant Secretary of State, which I'm not sure if it is still. It used to be Michael Gove, but it's a Conservative minister at any rate. So I strongly suspect they won't. So the best case in this situation is for there to be a lot of local argy-bargy about it, and for maybe we'll have to see how many problems are caused. It may well be that there's a load of there's so many cases that it's worth someone bringing a judicial review into it to make sure that it was all done legally, because this is incredibly dodgy. But I'll get rid of that one. And I'll go through a few comments, and I'll go on to Boris Johnson's law breaking, because this is a good one. Let's go through some comments there. The anti-woke mob is very loud but small. It is, of course, amplified by the Tory press. Ultimately, the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Express, the Sun, they all amplify it and make people think they're part of a larger majority than they really are. And also things like the Brexit result in 2016, the general election result in 2019, it sort of made these people think that they were part of a majority when they weren't. Asked about before, vendors saying doing a freedom of information request on every Tory traitor responsible for Brexit to every EU country, asking if they have one of their passports. How viable do you think this is? I think in a lot of cases, we sort of know. It's known, for example, there's quite a lot of members of the House of Lords who have an Irish passport. Or an EU passport of some description. Mostly it will be an Irish passport. Apart from anything else, if you're rich enough, you can just get a Maltese passport. I think the EU are trying to clamp down on that a little bit. Getting Maltese passports by just depositing a load of money in one of their banks. But at the moment, you can get that. Disgusting how much the Tories have discriminated against the young. They should be livid, but I doubt they're even aware. I'm not sure. I think they're not livid enough to vote. The problem is a lot of young people are also turned off politics, and the Tories know this. There was a poll that's just come out today saying that if there were to be another referendum on rejoining the EU, 86% of young people would vote in favour. And that's actually higher than the percentage of young people who voted to remain in 2016. That was roughly 70% of young people voted to remain. This is like suggesting 86% would vote to rejoin. Bear in mind, a number of those people wouldn't have been old enough to vote in 2016. I mean, that is the tragedy of it for such a close result. A lot of the votes for Leave were elderly votes who are now dead. They're dead. And a lot of, most of the young votes were for Remain, and many of those, and there's quite a lot of people now old enough to vote that weren't old enough to vote then, and they don't want it. Femi was, you'll know Femi, anti-Brexit campaigner, pro-EU, was just saying today, it was reacting to an article that was why old people voted for Brexit. He said he don't care. It says if he's in a room full of people watching television and he changes the channel to just what he wants and then walks out the room, then he's a bit of a dick. And that's exactly what they did. Elderly people voted for Brexit. Many of them were never going to live to see Brexit, and they voted for Brexit. And a lot of young people, I think, are livid. It's just that a lot of young people are not going to express themselves at the ballot box, partly because they are generally disenfranchised from politics, or they see themselves as being, and partly because it's like, well, who do you vote for? Labour are insisting they will remain outside the single market and customs union. The Liberal Democrats are less so, but it's still a bit odd what their position is. It's like, if you're in Scotland, you can vote for the SNP. If you're in Wales, you can vote for Plaid. For all the good that will do, realistically, but it's not obvious for a young person how they use their vote for anti-Brexit purposes. Right, I'll go to the last one, then we'll come back to some more comments. So I don't want to forget this one. So I can't show you this one, unfortunately, but I'll make sure that Graham sticks a thing in the comments below so you can watch it yourself. So does everyone remember how Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson both got a police fine last year as a result of Partygate? And then earlier this year, Rishi Sunak was filming a promo as Prime Minister where he took his seatbelt off to turn to the camera in a moving car, which is illegal. And he was fined for it. The police investigated and fined him. So he's broken the law again. Boris Johnson has obviously decided he doesn't like the fact that Rishi Sunak is double the criminal he is. So this morning, a very drunk-looking Boris Johnson was filming a promo video for the campaign, because you'll notice he hasn't put any effort at all into the campaign. He's obviously rolled himself out to avoid looking like he wasn't trying to help the Conservatives. And he's gone, oh yeah, very Conservative, from the back of this moving car, pissed as a fart. That doesn't matter, he's not driving. And without wearing a seatbelt in a clearly moving car. So really, the police, I don't actually know where it is, that's the problem, but the police should be investigating that, and that should be another fixed penalty notice coming. So Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak can both be tied for how many police fines they've received for the same offences as well. For the same offences. Johnson hits late equaliser. Will it go to VAR? It better go to VAR. The issue here is knowing which police, because there is no there are national police, I suppose, but it would be an individual police force that would have to investigate this. And it's a case of where is he? So I suppose you should be able to find out where someone like Boris Johnson is, but it would need to be. Let's see if I can find if anyone's put any comments suggesting that they know where he is. But yeah, you'd need to know where he was so you can alert the individual police force. But can you believe that? Can you believe that? At this time, there are still Brexiteers who believe in Brexit in the UK. Must be insane. Well, yeah, I mean, bear in mind where they get their news from. It's not from me. It's from It's from the Daily Mail or the Daily Express or the Sun or the Telegraph. You know, and it's and also people fall for the, oh yeah, there are problems, there are clear problems, but actually COVID or the war in Ukraine. So there's been a lot of cover for Brexit. But even so, whenever you look at the polling, it's just the number of people who want to rejoin just keeps going up. The number of people who want to stay out just keeps going down. And part of that is just elderly people dying off. I don't like to say things like that, it's a bit morbid, but it is the case that elderly people are dying off, and they were the big supporters. Younger people are getting to the age where they can vote and therefore feature on these polls. And also, some people have actually just realized that it's a complete mess. A complete mess. Imagine a well-known brand such as Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Nike, Samsung, Apple, etc., ignoring young potential customers in the way the Tories are doing to young voters. They'd not have a viable future. The Conservatives do not have a viable future. I want you to consider the following things. First of all, obviously the Conservatives are not popular right now because after 13 years of government, they've broken everything. So at the moment, all of the things being equal, they're unpopular. Then consider this. So for those who don't know, polling in both America and the UK, we're seeing that what usually happens is people, when they're younger, more idealistic, they're more likely to vote for progressive parties, right? As they head into middle age and they start to see that they are gaining from capitalism, they're homeowners, they're starting to get a bit more money from their jobs, they maybe even start to save, the middle classes, then they start to vote Conservative more. And you see this increase in the proportion of people as they head into middle age and then onto old age voting Conservative. That is not happening with the latest two generations, like millennials and Generation Z. That's not occurring. What they're finding is in both America and the UK, that as the millennials are heading into middle age, and the Generation Z getting older as well, they're not following the usual trajectory. In fact, with one of them, I can't remember which one it is, they're actually getting less conservative. And part of this will be the general attitude of Conservatives in America and the UK to the climate emergency, and you know, the fact that younger generations now are struggling to get any benefits from capitalism at all, you know, such as home ownership and or even decent incomes so that they can save. They can't save. So what we're going to find a confluence of things happening in, say, the next 10, 20 years. And I hope things happen more quickly than this, but if nothing else, think about in 20 years' time, the current generations who have tended towards Conservative voting as they got older, dying out. The younger generations not turning to the Conservatives. The people who had no fear of the EU are now the main voting blocs. The Conservatives are already facing, you can't ever say an existential crisis because they've been around for like two centuries in one form or other, and they've got all the money behind them. But you think about where they are facing an existential crisis. And look at what they're doing. They're actually moving further away from voters. They're becoming more extreme. So you could actually, although I cannot see a future where they're not about, because it seems mad to me, all the money's behind them, all the infrastructure's behind them, of course they'll still be there. But they cannot exist in their current form. In their current form, in 20 years, they're dead. They're finished, they're over. Yeah, that's why, you know, TV stations like GB News are flogging a dead horse, I think. You know, if it keeps going, it's only because someone's pumping money into it. Because it's simply not, and again, we come back to these culture wars from the start. Whenever you have a culture war that ends up with consumer power weighing in, that consumer power is not on their side. The consumer power is on the woke side. And it just shows that the likes of GB News, they've got a very limited, even potential audience. And that audience is going to be dying out. Over the next couple of decades, it's going to be dying out. You know, and I do have a lot of, assuming the planet survives, or at least the planet will be fine, assuming our environment survives, then I do actually have quite a lot of optimism about the future. I have often described myself as an optimistic cynic in that I think the world is a really crap place now, but it will get better. You're getting more socialist and anti-monarchy as I get older. See, when did I think my socialism has been fairly static for the past 15 years, I would probably say. But I did tend to get more left-wing as I got older. But in terms of anti-monarchy, I mean, I want reform of the monarchy, but, you know, as people know, I am still in favour of constitutional monarchy. I just wish they would strip away all the feudal monarchy bits. What about this Conservative conference happening in London? So this will be the Democratic Conservative Organisation. This is the Boris Johnson cults, basically. Wonder if they're getting together a plan to stop this. If that is the one you mean, is Richard, their only plan is to get Boris Johnson made leader of the Conservative Party again. That is their only plan. If Brexit does not solve any, because it is purely a personality cult. The Democratic Conservative Organisation is a personality cult. It's got nothing to do with policies or anything. It's purely about getting Boris Johnson in charge again. If Brexit did not solve any problems, how should Rejoin only solve the problems Brexit created? I mean, it hasn't solved anything yet because it hasn't happened. But of course, it will only solve the problems Brexit created. It can't claim to solve all the problems. But Brexit already has caused a lot of problems, and it's going to cause many more problems to come. You know, the argument from Tories, because this is the thing, the fundamental argument fails. Their argument was about we should have freer trade. And the EU is really protectionist. And it's like, yeah, it is. But inside the EU, it's the freest trade anywhere in the world. Outside it, not so much. But it's like, where are you going to get this free trade from? The EU is protectionist, so we can't get free trade with them. China's incredibly protectionist. We can't get free trade with them. America not only is very protectionist, America is becoming more protectionist. You know, the Inflation Reduction Act is a huge piece of highly illegal protectionist legislation. So where is this free trade coming from? It doesn't exist. We're not going to have free trade with anyone. We have abandoned free trade with an entire continent on the promise of getting free trade with the rest of the world. But the rest of the world is protectionist. But anyway, Eddie there saying, my son and daughter, mid-20s, despair at most of their friends who don't vote. They just can't be bothered. We need to work to the young to get their views to the polling station. So what I used to tell my students in imploring them to vote, and I never, of course, urged them to vote for any particular person or candidate or party. What I would say to them is, my argument to them was, the reason why you don't feel politicians are targeting you is because they're not. And the reason they're not is because you're not voting for them. Politicians have, in order to win, they need to target a very specific group. They can try and target everyone, but then their message gets confused. So they have to target very specific groups. And the groups they target are the large blocks of swing voters. So in order for the young to feel that politicians are engaging with them, they need to let those politicians know their vote is up for grabs. And the way to do that is to vote. But you don't have to vote for a person. If young people say, well, I don't want to give my vote to any candidate because I don't think any of them speak for me, fine. Go along to the polling station, fill out your ballot, but not with any candidate. Just spoil your ballot. Just say, don't put anything rude, because it's not the people who count, it's not their fault. Just on your ballot paper, instead of ticking a box, just write none of the above or something like that. Or a big grumpy face, an emoji grumpy face, whatever you like, but you will count as having voted. And if lots of young people do that, then although you don't know how anyone's voted, it is recorded who of which like addresses and ages and things like that voted. If politicians start to see a lot of young people suddenly voting, then all of a sudden they'll know that their votes are up for grabs. That is the trick. That's how you break the cycle. You can't expect the politicians to break the cycle because they can only win by targeting large groups of available votes. So the cycle has to be broken by young people voting, but they don't have to vote for a candidate. Just go along, fill your ballot paper and just spoil your ballot, post it, you've counted as voting. You need to get more people to do that. David there, Phil, if you think If the UK starts to rejoin the EU will demand to adopt the euro as currency. That is one of the starting positions, yes. It doesn't mean we definitely do have to, but it is one of the conditions. The process of joining is a negotiation. It is in theory possible we could negotiate. We can't obviously negotiate all the opt-outs we had before. That doesn't mean to say we can't negotiate any. But when we started the negotiations, we would have to accept, we'd have to say to the British public that it is possible we will not be able to negotiate retention of the pound. But as long as you organise the referendum better than the original one. So you say, right, this is a referendum. Do you want us to start negotiations to rejoin the EU? And make sure in the legislation it says there will be a second referendum on the terms of membership before we actually rejoin. As long as you do that, then the Brexit crowd can't go saying, oh, but it'll have to mean this, that, or the other. It's just a referendum, a two-stage referendum. The first is just, shall we start negotiations to rejoin the EU? At the end of it, there will be another referendum on the terms of membership. And then that should be fine. But it is possible we would have to adopt the euro. There are certainly things we would have to do. We're not going to get out of everything that we got away with before. Brexit's a teenager leaving home in a tantrum and feeling hungry by tea time. Yeah, except this particular Brexit died on the way home of starvation, didn't it? To those kids who don't vote, do you tell them that they will never buy a house or have free healthcare or workers' right in the future if they don't vote or they're already disenfranchised? So in my particular case, so I've not been a teacher for a few years, so I haven't directly appealed to young people. I wouldn't have said that, no. Or I wouldn't do anything that would be, again, I was very, even though I'm very politically involved, I was always very professional as a teacher. I would never say anything to my students that could be construed as political. I would simply urge them to vote, and I would just argue that the reason why they don't feel politicians are targeting them is because they're not, and I explained the reason why they're not, and that the only way to break the cycle is for young people to vote in large numbers. But it does not, I just emphasised, it does not have to be for a candidate. You can spoil your ballot and you still count as having voted. Just no one gets your vote. If you don't want anyone to have your vote, they don't have to have your vote. If Australia is any indication the future is bright, every mainland state has a Labour government and we have Labour in power federally. Only Tasmania has a Conservative government. So I don't know how it's going in Australia, whether that would be a long-term thing, because at any particular time you get these things. Like over the last few years, we've had a little flurry of far-right lunatics losing power. We've had it in Brazil, we've had it in Australia, we've had it in America, you know, but we're going to have it in the UK. But these things sort of swing around, don't they? Actually, I think Erdogan's up for the chop, isn't he, soon in Turkey? I've not really been following that too carefully. But then these things come around again. Italy have now got a far-right government. So it's not necessarily a trajectory that continues in the future. It's just that in America and the UK, polling is indicating that the generations coming through, the ones who are now voting, but as they're getting older, they're not swinging towards voting Conservative in the same way that my generation and earlier generations did. They're, you know, and as I say, in one particular case, and I forget which it is, in one particular case, they are actually turning away from conservatism because they're getting older. You can imagine the situation, people getting older, getting to in their 30s, and they're thinking, hang on a minute, I'm still not on the housing ladder. Rent keeps going up. Because the thing is, if you get yourself onto the housing ladder and, you know, what you're paying in mortgages is going to be really expensive. You've got the best house you can, right? But 10 years down the line, your repayments aren't going up any higher. Well, interest rates can increase, of course, and indeed have done in the last year. But generally speaking, your repayments aren't going up, but your pay has gone up, not just as you've advanced in your career, but just with inflation. So 10 years later, your mortgage payment is now way smaller than a rent payment. 20 years down the line, smaller still. Once you've paid it off, you're not paying anything, apart from some insurance to make sure your deeds are indemnified. and it's there you go. Canada's going fast too. Yeah. So these things will keep coming around. It's just that, this trend we're seeing in America and the UK for younger to middle-aged people now, not tending towards the Conservatives. The Conservatives, and at the moment, as I say, they're doing the opposite of what they need to do to address this. They're actively doing the opposite. They're doubling down on the crazy. And the reason for that is because I suspect the far right know that they've got limited time left. I think they know it. And I think that's why they're exerting so much pressure on the Conservatives and in America on the Republicans. But there it is anyway. Thank you very much, Andrew. It's I'll just catch up the last few comments before we close off. It says, might be Daniel saying, might be a temporary thing though. We had a time in Germany when red-green coalitions were nearly everywhere. Conservatives bounced back under Merkel. I'm not sure younger generations will care about the pound in the future. They're all cashless these days, sort of sentimentality, unlike older folks. That is a very good point. If we do become a genuinely cashless society, people will mind it less. There are still economic arguments to retain your own currency, though. Having control of your own monetary policy, there are political arguments for it. But in terms of people, the general public, you are right. Most people will not have that attachment to it. In fact, there's another comment from the Freckle Puny there. Given people have gone a lot more cashless, especially during the pandemic, I don't think people are as bothered about what the physical currency looks like. Well, the physical currency will still look like, for example, there can still be a picture of King Charles on the euro note, because each individual country gets to have its own designs on the euro. Obviously, you'll get euros from everywhere because they're just, but each member state of the eurozone has its own design. We can put what we like on it. We could put Boris Johnson hanging by his testicles from a lamppost if we want. Actually, there may be some objections to that. Phil, I know you don't like predictions, but do you want to have a stab at Tory losses today? No, I don't at all. I really have no idea. You've got some people go, oh, they might lose 1,000. And I'm thinking, no, they say they're going to lose 1,000. That means they expect to lose less or fewer. The problem is independent candidates muddy the waters a lot of, and I don't know how much the voter suppression is going to impact things. I have no idea. I do not. Local election predictions are bad enough at the best of time, like the forecast. It's harder to poll local elections than general elections, way harder. But when you've got things like voter suppression into the mix as well, which is new this year, I just really don't. I'm just going to wait. All I will say is don't get excited tomorrow morning, because tomorrow morning, the results that will have been counted overnight are the ones that are most likely to favour Labour. So wait until they're all in, is what I would say before you start jumping around. But it will be interesting to see some key barometer seats. Like Hartlepool will be interesting, although there were Hartlepool seats up last year as well. So it's not like that big a thing, but there are some that's worth looking at. But anyway, thanks very much for coming on this morning. Don't forget to vote if you are up for voting today, and take your photo ID. Don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and there'll be details below for like links to things if you're interested as well, including joining Patreon if you would like as well. But have a good day, and until next time, I'll see you later.